Hi guys, welcome back to the Revive Stronger podcast. I'm your host, as always, Steve Hall, and today I welcome Holly Baxter back on the show. It's been a couple of years since we've dug into her personal journey, and there's a lot here to dig into and learn, as well as to just glean from someone who's been competing for a decade. Last year, she turned pro as a bikini athlete within the IFBB, and this year she is competing to try and go to the Olympia stage. There's been lots of lessons, challenges that she's faced along the way, particularly changes to her training to specifically try and build a bikini competitive physique. And also, we dig into some issues with trying to assess physique changes over time, for example, using a DEXA scan. How reliable and useful is that for assessing whether or not something you've done with your training is actually taking effect for muscle growth outcomes that you're looking for? We also dive into her approach to cardio, her approach to her calorie deficit, why she has a floor of calories that she won't go under, and there's much more to be gleaned from this episode. So guys, really do sit back and enjoy. And as a reminder, to make sure that the podcast continues to grow, meet and reach many different people, please do leave a comment, subscribe to the channel, give us a thumbs up, give us a rating and review over on Spotify. All of that is appreciated. Take a screenshot, tag myself and Holly, and share it on your story on Instagram so that the growth of the channel continues, and I appreciate it. So guys, without further ado, let's get into the chat. Holly, last time we were on was actually episode 405. We're now in the 470s, I think. So it's been a while. You were on for a volume roundtable, which was fantastic. I love the roundtables. But before that, it was 2 years since we chatted one-on-one like this. Can you believe it's been that long? I personally can't. The time just flies by. And you've been busy, for sure. Lots of people have been busy, but you've done a lot and competed again. And actually, last year, you turned pro. So at the Pittsburgh show, you got your pro card, which is fantastic. Are you currently still in prep? You haven't finished your season just yet, have you? You still got more on the cards, right?
Scarily, I have so many more competitions still
Really?
on the docket. Yeah, well, and I think it's just such a competitive landscape that in order to win a pro show, especially in the bikini division, um, it's really tough. So I've got like several shows lined up. The next one will be in 8 weeks, which is the Tampa Pro, conveniently where I live, which is nice. So that'll be a little bit less stressful with all the travel that kind of goes into it. But again, if I want to qualify for the Olympia, I have to win. So, yeah, there's like several shows that I will probably do back to back, and I may not get there, but I mean, that's the goal.
I know we were talking off air, and I was saying how I was kind of making my way through your vlogs, which if people are interested in digging into your journey, you've done actually really cool vlogs where you've literally gone over your training, nutrition, and like the spreadsheets of what you're tracking, what you're changing, kind of as if you're coaching yourself through the whole thing, which is really cool. And actually on that note, are you're self-coached, right? You're doing it all kind of on your own.
100%, yes. Yes.
Have you had coaches in the past, or you always been self-coached?
I've always been self-coached. I've always had, some pretty good people in my corner to just bounce an idea off here or there. But yeah, I think it's something that I've really like taken a strong interest to. I love it. I love the challenge. And I think a lot of folks struggle with the self-bias. I think like you see yourself through a particular lens, or you have a certain way that you like to look. And because of the subjectivity of this sport, it's really tough to coach yourself, and I've really enjoyed it. So yeah, I am.
I always find it interesting because I do think you can be really competitive self-coached. I've coached myself for, my first time I went and competed, I had a coach. I literally was kind of a bit clueless at the time, so it was great to have a coach to kind of guide me. And then last year I competed and Cliff Wilson was doing all my nutrition because I was just like, I'd self-coached 2 seasons prior to that, and I'd done well and done okay. And similar to you, had people in my corner to kind of bounce ideas off. I was just like, hey, Cliff is arguably the best like natural bodybuilding coach out
Yeah.
there. He is literally turning people pro. Let's see what he does differently, what I can learn and kind of get from it. And I will say it was not actually, and we're talking off air about competing whilst managing business and everything like that. I will say one thing that I really benefited from was just offloading that stress of, I don't have to think about the manipulations I need to make to my training. To training I did, but to like nutrition, that was all just up to Cliff. Yeah, I imagine maybe some of the offloading some of that would be helpful for you, but at the same time sounds like you're similar to me in that you like having the control, and obviously you're very educated in this. You know yourself really well and have been very successful. I mean, you turned yourself pro basically, so you can't really say much.
Yeah, look, I think everyone could benefit from a coach for sure. I just don't know who I would go to. I think there are a lot of very well-known, like well-renowned coaches in the IFB Federation that look after and handle like the men's open bodybuilders, but there are fewer that I would feel confident going to in the women's bikinis. So I don't know whether I would go and get a coach. I think it would be great, like you said, to hand over like the stress of having to make the manipulations and just have somebody else do it all because it is time consuming. I mean, the time that you spend sitting down, entering data, making manipulations. I mean, my last peak week was quite a little bit different than what I'm used to. And I was a little bit nervous because it was the first time that I'd, done this particular style of peak. So yeah, I can definitely see benefits for having a coach, even as somebody that's experienced. But up until now, I feel like I've been doing well so far on my own, and maybe at some point I will in the future. Who knows? But for now, I'm loving it.
Yeah, no, that's good. And I think that's the important part, is that it's not an overwhelming sense of stress, and that you are able to remain objective, and it's not, holding you back in any way, shape, or form. And I think importantly, you're in this space and you have people by your side who are very educated and who you can kind of talk through things and rely upon a little bit and bounce ideas off, which was the same for me. And I think if you are, I don't know, just your average individual who just wants to kind of compete and their partner doesn't understand, like they haven't got any friends who really do it, that could be a really tough thing to kind of self-coach to stage. But kind of having that support network, like a big part of coaching, I'm sure you agree, is like just having
Yeah.
someone in your corner to support you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the other thing that's been really helpful in being your own coach is that I can make very last minute like adjustments and manipulations. And I think because of the like requirement for me to like still have a business, run multiple companies and compete, life doesn't always go very smoothly. And I mean, I'm getting things thrown at me all the time. There will be scenarios where I'm in the gym in the middle of a workout and I'm getting phone calls like, I've got to leave the gym, like take a call, or there's some kind of interruption. My schedule is crazy. I think on average, I do probably 80 hours most weeks of work. So then I'm trying to add in, my training and all of the prep that goes into your nutrition outside of that. So I'm very time poor. So I think to accommodate all of the demands of business, and obviously we're involved in research and research reviews, and there's just so many like components to our company that I need to be really flexible and giving my time to that. So there are so many instances where I've had a plan for my nutrition, I've had a plan for my training, but I can't execute it the way that I want to. So I've had to, okay, well, what do I do now? And I think if I was working with a coach, they would hate me because I would constantly be having to manipulate and change and adjust like in the heat of the moment because of all of those, requirements and obligations for work. So I think it's been helpful in that regard, just having the flexibility and the knowing and know how to make last minute changes if I need to. So,
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I know, for me at least, one of the things I'm really keyed into is obviously the communication with competitive clients needs to increase as you get closer to stage.
mhm.
And I almost want to be like, and I give them WhatsApp access to me, and I'm communicating them every day, multiple times a day during peak weeks or between shows. And it's a lot. And I don't know. I see some people working with, I don't know, 50 competitors in a season. And I'm like, I have no idea how you manage that. So and you hear horror stories of coaches not getting back for like, I don't know, a week. A day is bad for me. Like over more than a day, I'd be like, what am I doing? I missed that message. That wouldn't really happen. So yeah, knowing that you have a coach that could do that for you or like reliably is tough. So I
Yeah.
can understand that for sure. And actually, something I did want to talk about was, I know in one of your videos, you're like, this is the first year you're going to be able to put like competing number one. That's your biggest priority. You're going to put less into business and things. It sounds like that's one of the things that maybe didn't go quite to plan.
Definitely went out the window about 2 weeks into my prep, I think. So yeah, it definitely was not the priority. I don't know whether I ever will be able to do a bodybuilding show and have it be the number one focus. I think this year, however, was the first year, at least in the Pittsburgh Pro Show that I competed in, a couple of weeks ago, that was the first time that I've taken like peak week off from one-on-one coaching. So up until now, I haven't actually ever like put my clients aside. Like they always come first. So I'm peaking, traveling, and often in some of the previous federations that I've competed with, it's a week long like extravaganza. I mean, there's multiple events in that week leading into the competition that you've got to be available for. So it's always been a little bit of a challenge to try and also maintain my client workload and that. So this year, I did take the week off and I felt very, very confident and comfortable going in for the first time. So that was a very new and novel experience, which is crazy because I've been competing now for, I think it dawned on me earlier this year, like a decade. I think I started in 2015. And I've only really had 2 years where I haven't hopped on stage. And that was obviously during COVID. And then I went through a divorce and was kind of basically restarting all of my businesses again in 2023. So my attention was definitely in other places, not thinking about stage. So it's been a really fun and interesting journey, kind of traveling through each of the different federations and different categories, and just seeing how you can manipulate things, through your training and diet to peak for a different show.
That's crazy that I wasn't aware of your competitive history and that it's been a decade of competing, which is really cool. So this is your decade this year, which
Yeah.
is really cool. Mine was last year, so I started my
Cool.
first show was 2014, but I haven't done as many seasons as you. I certainly took more time between them, which I definitely needed because I was not of a competitive standard for a while. It took me a long time,
Yeah.
but you've done tremendous. And I haven't actually said it, but massive congratulations on turning pro. Like that's huge. It's a massive feat, especially like it's not like you did it in the WNBF, which is where I'm pro. You've done it with the IFBB, which is like the creme de la creme. There's not many people that are able to be able to do that. So, yeah, massive props to you for managing to do that. And yeah, the Pittsburgh Pro, I saw you at that show, and I mean, competing as a pro, I'm imagining at least my experience was I did my first show last year in the Netherlands and I got my pro card. I wasn't expecting it. It was like, oh, amazing. And then I was like, oh, my whole season changed. And I had now to do a kind of pro qualifier and then go to Worlds as a pro. And it was suddenly like the way I term it is like playing on hard mode. I was just like, I wasn't particular, like, I just wasn't used to that level of competition and standard yet, and that I was there. So did that kind of hit you a little bit where you're like, whoa, okay, this is a new level. I need to kind of level up what I'm doing on my end as well.
Yeah, I think, gosh, I will say I know for the last 6 years, like prior to moving over to the IFBB, so prior to that, I've been with the WBFF, and I would describe that federation kind of like a Victoria's Secret runway show with bodybuilding combined. So it's always been a lot of fun. But the quality and the standard of the competitors in that federation as pros, I think, has been second to none. Like I will still say, I've seen some of the best physiques when I was competing over there. So I know I've always kind of had a pretty competitive group of girls to compete up against. And I think that moving over to this federation, the IFBB with the bikini girls, it is just a different look. So I'm used to seeing like incredible athletes, but now I'm just looking at a different like looking physique. And it's meant that I've had to make a lot of changes to the way that I train. And I think historically, I was a fitness competitor when I was with the WBFF, and I would say that there's a lot of symmetry with that federation. So top to bottom, we've got like nice cap shoulders, good muscularity, good dense muscle density in the back and the chest. Excellent focus on like the lower body, big muscular quads, like everything was very symmetrical. So I enjoyed training for that particular federation because the programs were arguably very balanced. It was a good even split of upper and lower body training. And, it kind of served like my background, which has always been in athletics. Coming across to the bikini division, like now that I've actually seen the pros in person, and I had never seen a pro bikini competitor really up until getting back, backstage in Pittsburgh in 2024. And I was like, whoa, there's such a big focus on the glutes. There's significantly less importance on basically all other muscle groups. Shoulders arguably are very important for bikini, but it's meant that my training is skewed so heavily towards glutes, and I've really I don't know that I'd say I've enjoyed that transition because I like to have an athletic physique. I like the variety of exercises in my program. I like kind of dabbling over in, some powerlifting here and there. I enjoy strength training, and I've essentially had to take all of that out. So the biggest changes I think in my programming for bikini is I don't do biceps and triceps. I haven't done a bicep or tricep exercise in like 2.5 years, believe it or not. I think I might have done some for like a picture or a photo shoot or something. And that's about the gist of it. And I've taken my back and chest volume down to like almost nothing. I think I do 6 sets per week on my chest and my back. That's it. And then the rest of the volume over the course of my 4 days that I train is mostly shoulders and glutes. So yeah, the programs are very focused, and it kind of little gets a little bit cumbersome, unfortunately. But I also love the challenge, and it's been really fun to apply kind of what we know through like all of the scientific research that's coming through, and see what I can do. And I didn't consider myself a natural athlete, even though I'm competing in the IFBB. So unfortunately, the changes that I know I need to make to maybe step it up to that next level are probably going to take me another 12 months, like a focused glute medius training, which is such a small muscle group, but like that's the area that I really need to bring up. So it'd be cool to see how those changes kind of track. But just last week, I went into the lab here at the University of South Florida, and we've got the B mode ultrasound. So obviously, that's a direct measure of muscle growth. A very reliable way to track your changes as opposed to something like a DEXA or an in-body scan. So we got my glute medius and glute max measurements, and I'm going to do my shoulders this week and see what I can do in the next 8 weeks, which I don't think there's a whole lot of data on that muscle group. So I'm kind of pumped for that.
Yeah, oh, yeah, lots to kind of say on that front. And I think one of the key things you pointed out was, yeah, when you are competing at that level as a pro, you sometimes have to do things you don't want to do. And it is small details because everyone is fantastic at that point.
Mhm.
And it is that artist sculpting the physique towards like whatever the judges are kind of determining they want to see there. But that's tough, yeah, I guess. And I guess as a side note on that, if you were to embrace like the training you love, you probably wouldn't have a competitive physique as a bikini in the IFBB, but you couldn't go into one of the more muscular categories where maybe it would kind of be more appropriate because then you'd have to go on gear to compete against
Yeah,
that level,
yeah.
right?
Exactly. It's the downside. I wouldn't be able to get competitive enough to like staying as a natural athlete. And yeah, the girls in just figure like one step up. It's just incredible, like the physiques that we see there. And I don't know that I have any aspirations to do that. It's just a scary thought. And I mean, look, there are obviously inherent risks that come with doing that. And I think so many people are willing to do that. But I don't know whether I am at this point. And look, there might be some people that would even question, am I natural? And I have been pretty open about my recent journey. Actually, it was during my divorce. I actually went on hormone replacement therapy for about 8 months because my testosterone levels were so low. I just felt like a living zombie during that period and was struggling with a lot of negative symptoms, unfortunately. But it was arguably due to stress and then low testosterone levels. So I've talked a little bit about that, but I think because I've kept all of my levels like within normal physiological reference ranges, I think the most that my testosterone levels ever got up to was about 70 micromoles per deciliter. So it's still within the normal range for females, but I think I was at like 5 micromoles per deciliter of testosterone for like a good period of time. I'm like, I can't survive like this. So yeah, I guess there'd probably be people that would say, well, you're not technically natural anymore, but I'll still make that claim because I've seen what other levels look like, which would provide you with some physiological advantages. But I think when you do it the right way, it is what it is.
Yeah, I mean the fact that you're even open and honest about that, like, because I could see people just wanting to like hide that under the rug or whatever it is, because you're saying
Yeah.
you're natural, and now people are like, oh yeah, yeah, right, it was that.
Yeah.
I think it just speaks to your credibility in that front. the fact that like you were in the like normal physiological ranges too.
Yeah.
I have some of the listeners might even know my background was with where the name Revive Strong comes from. I suffered a head injury, and part of that my testosterone because it bruised my they think my kind of pituitary gland, hypothalamus, and my testosterone plummeted through the floor. I was on like below normal
Yeah, you're
natural
hypergonadal.
levels.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I was similarly, I know what that feels like depression, terrible energy, nothing good. I remember it as a horrible time in my life. So I actually took TRT. It now is over 10 years ago. That happened, and it was kind of completely life changing. Even to go from outside of normal to normal ranges, and similarly, I was just doing it for kind of medical purposes. It wasn't for like performance improvement, and it was completely like life changing for me. And I'm lucky enough I could come off it similar to you and sustain normal levels. But I know, I guess as a competitor, it then puts you in a sticky position of, and I don't know how they'd look at it. I think in your case, it would probably look as a therapeutic use exemption if you did try and compete, say, with the WNBF. That's what I'd imagine they'd go down, or that's what you'd have to like file for. But in my
Yeah.
eyes, I view myself as natural, and like I've been off it for 10 years. Like I barely had any muscle when I was on it. Similar to you, you grew all your muscle off it.
Yeah,
It wasn't
prior to
like
that,
that suddenly
exactly.
transformed your physique or anything. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think the legalities of it all come down to which federation are you competing with. I mean, there's obviously no issues at all for me competing with the IFBB as a bikini competitor, but they do have natural shows which I could probably go and do. And I think again, you just have to provide all of your medical information. But then there are obviously other federations. Again, it depends where you go, where it wouldn't be allowed, or that it would have to have been a certain number of years since, using, medicinal levels of testosterone. So, yeah, that was an interesting experience, but I'm glad that I didn't have to stay on that. But I don't know that it's necessarily needed for bikini. And again, I feel it's interesting because I have so many, people coming to work with me one-on-one coaching, and it's the first question that so many people ask about, like, do I need to do this? Do I need to hop on this? And I'm like, no, 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 no. Like, gosh, I've been able to accomplish a lot, but it's time consuming. And I think a lot of the younger athletes, and perhaps the ones that are doing really well in this division, and there are many that are like in their early 20s, and they have as much muscle as me. And I'm 36 years old, and I have been training for like well over, a decade. And it's taken a long time to get here. So it's not that it's impossible to get to the level of muscularity naturally. It's just how quickly or how much patience do you have? Because a lot of them don't want to wait that long. And so I get it. And I certainly don't place judgment on anybody that chooses to do it either. I mean, it's an untested sport. Great. Do it at your own risk. But I don't know that it's really necessary for bikini, like the bikini division. Um, where I would see it being advantageous, or other performance enhancing drugs, things that would elevate somebody's metabolism, like improve your BMR. I think that would be advantageous because it would give them more flexibility to eat more. So I look at some of my, competitors, and they'll be talking about like their calorie requirements and what they're able to consume. It's night and day difference. Like, I'm down on 1,170 calories, I think, for my final 4 weeks of this prep to kind of get to the level of conditioning that was needed. Whereas many of the other girls, they're able to consume like 2,000 to 2,500 calories. It doesn't take away from the hunger. It doesn't take away from the low energy. But the fact that you don't have to scrutinize every single meal that you put in your body, out of fear of going over your requirements. I mean, that makes a big difference. So I think to have increased flexibility around food, I can see, especially for the competitors that are doing back to back to back shows. Like, I was personally just thinking about this and reflecting on it in a video I recorded earlier this week. Um, the reality of doing another 6 shows later in the year and having to hang on to these low calorie targets, it is kind of intimidating. So who knows whether I'll make it that far into those competitions before I say, yeah, that's enough. And, trying to multitask and do it all together, it becomes a little difficult.
Yeah, I can totally see that. And I absolutely agree. When you can eat more but be in a similar calorie deficit, it just And we even see that with, I think it's like the energy flux, right? So the more calories you can expend and be in a similar calorie deficit and eat more, therefore, versus someone else, there seems to be benefits of that, just whether or not that is like a hunger and satiety and adherence and that sort of thing. So I can definitely attest to that too, where there's benefits. And the only thing I can think of that you'd be able to use that would be considered just like natural would be like wearing a weighted vest, or just ways to increase your energy expenditure. That is kind of like so you can eat a bit more. And with everything that you do there, there's costs involved, similarly to the drugs, but they're not as apparent in some ways, I guess, because they work
Yeah.
through different pathways and everything like that. On the training front, I did want to touch on it a little bit because I know you took a bunch of measurements and you mentioned kind of the in-body being impacted by various factors, and so you can't be too sure on that. And I know you did some like vlogs on that in terms of kind of detailing what improved, what didn't, and where everything went. So what was your kind of conclusion from everything, like your past training, where I think you said you were doing up to 30 sets of glute work, and like you said, only 6 sets for chest, for back, really on the back burner. Did you see the changes you hoped for, and how confident are you in the changes that you were able to measure via the tools that you had available?
Yeah, so this is really cool because I have data from all the way back to 2017. So I think as soon as I got off the plane from Australia and landed in the US, I'm pretty certain that I was driven straight to USF. That's where I met Dr. Buckner and Dr. Campbell as well. So I'm sure that I had my measurements almost that day, or very close around that time frame. So we've got lots of B mode ultrasound, which is your direct measure of muscle thickness across, I think, about 9 sites. So I have data on my quads, my hamstrings, my calves, my bis, tris. They usually do a muscle thickness measurement on your abdominals. And then I won't try and attempt to pronounce the muscle at the back, but it's basically near your scap. I know I'll butcher it if I try and pronounce it, but anyway, it's near your scapula. So those are the sites that I have. Which is very unfortunate because the muscle groups that I care most about for bikini are glutes and shoulders, and they're just not studied, or certainly not very well studied in our area of research. It's usually the bis or the tris, areas within the quad, because they're just easy and accessible, and they, produce really nice, clear images. So, what I can say is that when I implemented some higher volume training, and I think one of my program series on our app, which is the Get Lean and Train with Me series, my word, the volume on like quads was astounding. I'm pretty sure I was doing close to 40 sets a week, like direct work on my quads to get them to grow when I was competing in fitness, which was again like very muscular, all over, very even symmetrical look. And I did grow. I think over that time frame, I've probably been able to increase my quadricep muscle thickness by about zero point 0.7. But this is over years. So from 2017 through to about 2021, my quad muscle thickness has grown by about zero point 0.7 to zero point 0.8. Which is interesting because there have been studies recently out of the Schoenfeld lab where, with just 8 weeks of training, I think those participants were doing up to 45 sets on the rectus femoris. So they were doing quad exercises. And they were able to see muscle growth thickness changes of 0.72, I believe it was, in certain areas of a similar amount. So I have found that data to be interesting given I know how hard I trained and over what time span with very little time, out of focused training. Obviously, my caloric and energy balance have changed quite a bit throughout those like seasons of being in contest prep and then focusing on building. But there'd be a good period of time where like 8 months of the year, I'm just building muscle, or at least focusing on that inner surplus, sitting at a much higher body fat percentage. So quads definitely grew. And then as I intentionally regulated the volume to more of a maintenance volume, I've been able to just maintain my quad muscle thickness, which is really cool to kind of implement what science would say. And that's what it did. So I didn't make any, meaningful changes in quad thickness over the last 2 years, very intentionally happy with that. Didn't need bigger quads for bikini. And then I needed to atrophy my arms, and I was successfully able to atrophy my arms by doing no training. The first year, we did have changes that indicated maintenance of my muscle, and that was just through indirect work. So it turns out that the high volume of bench pressing or any chest movements, pushing movements, and the high volume that I was doing on my back was enough to maintain my bis and tris, interestingly. Now, I can't say that that's, what we see in the literature and for everybody else, but that's my experience. So I realized I actually have to take out back and chest volume if I want to successfully lose muscle in those, in the bis and tris. So yeah, everything has come down and I was able to do that, which is good. But I don't have tracked changes in my glutes. That's very recent data. And because of that, that's actually inspired like the next research investigation that we're going to do here at USF. So I'm in the process of writing up the IRB approvals right now. And that study will look to assess lean individuals. So we're going to be looking specifically at people with less than 15% body fat. There's just not good data, in that group of individuals. We have a lot of case studies of bodybuilders, and, fleeting data. But nothing that, is, has a really good study design and is interested in the things that I'm interested in. So we'll be looking at athletic, lean populations. We're going to look at different states of energy balance, because one of the common questions that we get asked is, well, if you're so lean, how do you expect to grow? And there's nowhere for me to really point to the research to say, well, this is what we can do. So we have data in normal healthy weight individuals, we have data in older individuals, but nothing in like super lean athletic populations. So we'll look at maintenance calories, a deficit, and then a small surplus. And we will be measuring the glutes and the shoulders, which again, there's such little data. So I'm really excited to kind of bring that to light for all the females that kind of care about different training interventions and different exercises. And we'll be using direct measures of muscle growth. And just this morning, I got off a phone call with a group here in Tampa that do MRI. And we'll look to not only incorporate B-mode ultrasound, but hopefully with some investment, we'll be able to get MRI imaging done too. So it will be one of the first studies that really does this well and comprehensively with all of the right pieces together. So I'm kind of pumped for that.
That's exciting. That does fill a nice hole within the literature at the moment. And is that specifically, you mentioned under 15%, is that females, males that you're looking
Yeah,
to kind of get in?
my preference would be to do a study in females. I think it's just unique and novel, but I don't know that we'll be able to get the participant numbers high enough for statistical power. So I think it'll be in males and females, but to draw in and allure both male and female, the program will still have like all elements, so that it's very much full body focus, but we will, there'll probably be a primary focus on the glutes and the shoulders in the program design, with secondary focuses on like the quads, the hamstrings. Like it'll still be a very well-rounded program, but we'll measure specifically, those sites.
Cool. Yeah, I was
Yeah.
thinking under 15% is pretty lean for a guy, very lean for a
For a
woman. So if you,
female, yeah.
yeah, so if you're getting in part, that's going to be hard to find the numbers, isn't it?
It is. And, we've talked with our research team and we had considered potentially doing the intervention online, where people would then need to submit every single training session, so we can watch every single rep. But, it kind of takes down the quality of the study. And whilst I still think that we could do it successfully, it would definitely be a limitation. And I think, for it to be the first of its kind, if it takes us 2 years to get the number of participants to go through the protocol, then so be it. I would probably rather have it, at the highest level of quality possible than, do it that way. So we'll have to see. I'm writing it up now. So
Exciting. Yeah,
yeah.
I definitely think going for taking a bit more time to get the quality there rather than trying to get it done in a sooner time period, but be like, oh, I wish it was like this. So I think that makes a lot of sense. And actually something you did a recent video on when you kind of expressed a little bit earlier was the inaccuracies of something like a DEXA scan. People will hear MRI, they hear ultrasound, they hear maybe CT scans. And like, well, that's not very accessible to me, but a DEXA scan, or maybe I can get one of those and do something similar to kind of tracking my muscle gain and things like this. And it's funny, before I watched your YouTube video, I've actually had a recent consultation with someone who was doing like regular DEXA scans. And unfortunately, I kind of roll my eyes at that data because I just know how unreliable it can be for
Yeah.
kind of tracking things. But people love numbers and they love to think that it's really objective and really like, so they can then be like, oh, I can see X happened here when I did this. And it's like, oh, I don't tend to use DEXA scans a whole lot for a variety of reasons. So I'd love to hear kind of your
Yeah.
thoughts on what you've seen with the inaccuracies with DEXAs.
Yeah, absolutely. It's funny. I feel like there was a period where, like, at least on social media, it was being conveyed as the gold standard. I mean, I believe I had that belief at one point, probably sometime within the last decade. It's only until I have actually started reading more about the inaccuracies, or at least maybe me reading more into the gold standards, that it's kind of been brought to my attention. So, yeah, I think for anybody that's like not sure what DEXA scans are. I guess the biggest problem with using a DEXA for measuring changes in skeletal muscle tissue is that there are two compartment models. So they assess fat mass, which it does relatively well, and then fat-free mass or just lean mass. And the problem with those lean mass measurements that we, receive after you've had a DEXA is that it also incorporates things like connective tissue, organ mass, skin, hair, nails, and then it also incorporates things like glycogen and water. And those two variables are so volatile. You're a coach, you track your clients' changes in scale weight, I'm sure, day to day, week to week. And those numbers bounce around so much. And it's most often not because there's meaningful changes in fat mass. It's because their dietary approach is changing. Maybe they're flexible dieting and they're focusing more on calories and protein than they are, the specific carb and fat numbers. Their fiber is changing, their hydration status changes because, of a more challenging training session that results in acute inflammation. Now they've got increased total body water. So, those variables will grossly affect a DEXA scan because the lean mass measurement is not directly skeletal muscle tissue. It incorporates all of those variables. So it's hard to then determine whether or not the changes that we see, after say a 12-week intervention, or where we've, maybe we've made some adjustments to our training protocols and we want to see, well, how much muscle did I grow in that time frame? It's difficult to really say whether the changes that are being observed are skeletal muscle tissue or whether it's changes in some of those variables, especially things like glycogen and water. So yeah, like you, I don't really recommend DEXA scans be done like all that often. I think it might be something that you could do maybe on an annual basis. They're just not sensitive enough to detect the changes that you and I are interested in, at least not over short periods of time. And I think the video that you're referring to was a 2019 study that I had just reviewed. And they were looking at comparing how well a DEXA scan aligns with an MRI, which is the gold standard. CT scans and ultrasound are also direct measures of muscle growth as well. But the results were really interesting in that particular study. So I think it was like 26 adults. It was over 10 weeks. The resistance training program had them doing full body training sessions, I think 2 times per week. And the results often conflicted with one another. So I think like if we've got 100% of the participants, only 46% had results that tracked changes over time that were within 3% of one another that matched. So that means that for the remaining 54% of participants, the DEXA scan and the MRI scan actually conflicted with one another. So basically, what that means is the MRI showed meaningful changes in muscle mass over the 10-week intervention, but the DEXA scan showed no change at all, or sometimes a loss. And I hear that a lot with clients too that will, say, hey, I've got a DEXA scan. Can you have a look at this? And, sometimes they're mortified because it tells them that they've lost muscle and they've just done, a really difficult and hard build. And we'll kind of have to talk through the potential limitations with using DEXA. So Yeah, I don't personally use that often anymore, and I'm just very grateful and fortunate that I have had access to, a B mode ultrasound within 15 minutes of my doorstep to kind of have that done. And I would encourage people to look for those types of modalities if they can, because it's so much more accurate. And if coaches are making adjustments to their training interventions with their clients, we want to be able to track, changes over short periods of time. So, yeah, I think B mode ultrasound, though it's probably not as available like in the clinical setting, if you're close to a research institute or a college or a university that has an science department, it's possible that they have them and that they would bring you in to go and have your measurements done. I know we offer that at USF. I've been trying to get all of my clients to come to Tampa. Hey, let me get your measures taken because it's really good.
Yeah, that does sound really good. I know I had Dr. Grant Tinsley on to talk about kind of using various tools for measuring body composition. He talked about all the kind of error rates involved with, like you said, fat mass. It could be even slightly better for fat mass, which goes to show how poor it can be for kind of equating for muscle mass changes there. And it's often, like you said too, where what you're trying to measure, because muscle gain is so slow, especially if you do it over a short time course, it's such a small measurement that there's too many other things changing that could influence the result by a large amount. It's the way I picture is it at the end of a contest prep, like you can't reliably even use scale weight at some point because you're trying to lose such a small amount of body fat or body weight that would be body fat, that your scale weight is adjusting due to water retention or not due to stress even, let alone
Yeah.
kind of changes in what you're eating. So it just becomes, you have to then refocus your tools, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think like in the final few weeks of a difficult cut, whether you're a competitor or not, most of us are trying to actively ramp up our exercise, whether it's through increases in training volume in the gym or you're doing more cardio. Those subtle adjustments, even if it's like a extra 30 minutes of hit cardio to help burn more calories to help you with your deficit. I mean, the increases in total body water and fluid shift could potentially mask the fat loss that's actually happening. So, yeah, it's tough. I think I always doubt myself, even still to this day, like when I'm looking at the scale, and I just have to have confidence in the process and the methods and the behaviors to kind of drive my confidence as opposed to relying on what the scale actually says.
Yeah, that's where the trust the process comes in. And it's like, you don't
Yeah.
have to kind of trust it because you know it's like objectively the right thing to be doing. But even like the scale can just play with your mind. And sometimes looking at photos, you have to kind of take a step back and take a breather.
Mhm.
But absolutely, at that point, it doesn't become that reliable. It's there for your clients where they can't maybe make it to your lab or what have you. Do you have any other tools that you kind of rely upon to assess body composition changes that are like your preferred?
Oh, goodness, not really. Look, I think DEXA is like the next best thing. And so I just hope that the clients that I'm working with are with me for at least a year so we can get at
Right.
least some kind of data because, if they have been working really hard, that might actually, show us that there's been some meaningful improvements. But yeah, outside of like body weight tracking, I rely a lot more heavily, I think, on caloric expenditure data. So one of the things that I have my clients do is track not only the caloric expenditure of their resistance training sessions, and again, I recognize like all of these wrist worn devices have some inherent degree of measurement error. Like those absolute values that we get are probably up to 40% off what they truly are if we were to compare your energy expenditure in like in a metabolic ward or something like that. Um, but I have them track their energy expenditure for their cardio. So if they do planned low intensity or high intensity cardio, I'll have them track all of that. So at least then we can look at like total estimated energy expenditure for the week. And then, I'll make them track that, every week, week over week, and we can look at relative changes. So even though the absolute numbers aren't going to be perfect, at least it helps us identify if the amount of energy that you expended this week, is similar, less, or more than the previous week. And it can help guide a better analysis of what's happening on the scale. So if somebody, didn't lose weight, at least I've got this data over here that might point to, oh, well, look at this, the changes from last week to this week's energy expenditure. you accomplished 500 calories less, that probably has resulted in you not being in a deficit anymore. So, next week, let's do better. So I really like to use that data, but it is a lot more work for the client, but it does give us a lot more like information to then base our decisions upon. So it's a little bit more accurate. But yeah, outside of that, no, I don't use anything else.
I guess maybe if I run through some of my ones, you might be like, oh, yeah, of course I do those as well. But that was a very interesting, actually. I saw it on your vlogs where you were kind of having your total kind of energy expenditure for the week. I was like, oh, I've never seen someone use that. Do you track steps alongside that, or is that included within this?
Yeah, so
I
that would
guess it
be a
is included.
separate. Yeah, it's a separate measurement. So yeah, I would have them following or adhering to like a weekly step goal within like a 10% range. And then we also track activity because I think, people's effort and focus and intention when they're training, it can waver, I think, even if they've
Sure.
gotten through the same lot of work, the session's exactly the same, but their output might be a little bit less. And sometimes that makes up for why we didn't see changes on the scale. They just weren't able to put in as much work for whatever reason.
I use something I find body measurements in terms of circumference measurements. I find them to be useful ish. What I mean by that is because there's so much human error that can be involved with most people take their own circumference measurements, and man, that's pretty hard to kind of keep consistent. But I do find a navel measurement, because you're literally measuring around the navel, that can be a bit more beneficial. Especially I use it for people like potentially recomping, or again, there's fat loss going on, but the scale isn't showing it. So using some measurements like that, I find helpful. Obviously, tracking gym performance, kind of no brainer if that's going in the
Mhm.
right direction or not. And then obviously photos for fat loss
Yeah.
every week at some points, every 2 weeks, every month. Muscle gain, it's kind of like, especially as a natural, it's like, well, you're just looking a bit softer. Like you can't rely on that too much. So you are just more needing the performance of the gym to be going in the right direction. Again, I kind of come back to what you said, trust the process. If your gym performance is going up, your scale weight is going up at an appropriate pace, like you can almost just those two factors alone, if they're specific towards the goal of hypertrophy, which they are, you're probably growing. Like you
Yeah.
just have to be patient.
Yeah, it's funny. I've spent a little bit more time, I think, nowadays reviewing people's programming. So not all of my clients will use a program that I have written or using our app. So I will have them like just send over what they've been doing, and I spend a lot more time trying to make sure that the volume on an individual muscle basis is kind of in alignment with their goals. And you would be surprised at how many people have sent their programs over, and for muscle groups that they tell me or have communicated that they want to grow, their weekly set number is like within a maintenance range. And they're frustrated they're not making progress. I'm like, is this the program you've been doing for the last 12 months? And they're like, well, yes. I'm like, well, how would you expect to make meaningful progress if you're doing, you're an advanced resistance trained athlete, you're doing 12 sets on said muscle group. I mean, that might be sufficient for somebody that's relatively new to resistance training, but, based on what we're seeing in terms of like the upper limits of resistance training volume in resistance trained individuals, you could be up to 30 or 45 sets. If you're really wanting to capitalize on hypertrophy adaptations. So, yeah, I think there's always a little bit of a surprise at what people have to do. And they're like, well, I don't have the time. And I'm like, okay, well, we've just got to manage our expectations here, because you're telling me you want this, but you also can't, put in this time, or for whatever reason, they're not able to train as many days of the week. So I think it's a humbling experience when somebody can kind of adjust their expectations, based on their reality. And at least they have a better idea about what they're going to achieve, rather than this unrealistic vision of muscle growth with a program that's underwhelming.
Yeah, that makes me think of the saying. I forget who it was. There was some famous individual, lots of money. I think it was Elon Musk, and basically people are asking like, "How did you get there?" and or like something along the lines of, "You wouldn't want to go through what I had to go through to get to where I am." Like he almost sounded like he didn't want to go through it, and that's kind of sometimes people look up to like someone like yourself, Holly, but they're just not. If they looked at the work that you did to kind of get to where you got to, uh, it probably isn't as glamorous as what they might imagine it to be, or they might look at then what they're doing and be like, oh, I'm doing a third, a half of kind of what they're doing. And so maybe I need to just pull back my expectations a little bit.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people are trying to grow everything all at once. If you were to do that like successfully, and let's say you are a resistance trained individual, the amount of hours that you would need to dedicate to training would just be like astronomical. It wouldn't be realistic. I try to encourage people that if you are time poor, if you need to skip a session or you need to reduce the duration of a session because you've got other obligations, focus on the muscle groups that you care about. Don't worry about if you don't care really about your calves or your buys or your tries. Just get in the gym and like pull the exercises that you know that are going to afford you to get to like an optimal weekly volume. Otherwise, you may end up just spinning your wheels if you keep just kind of selecting exercises very spontaneously without any intention. So I think even with maybe only 3 days a week in the gym, people can make great progress, but they would want to be very specific and focused on certain muscle groups rather than trying to do all of it. So at least then you can look back at the end of the week and go, great, I hit 30 sets on my back this week. That's an optimal amount of volume. At least I know that muscle's going to grow this week, if anything at all. So yeah, you kind of have to prioritize your time.
Yeah, that's always the kind of chat I have with people as well, where it's like if like you can grow something with that amount of time, but if you try and grow everything, you're probably not going to meet like the lower thresholds to really grow anything meaningful. So let's kind of put a bunch on the back burner, kind of go through a bit of specialization. Thankfully for myself, I bodybuilding is a high priority. I can't say it's number one, but it's up there, and I have the time to be able to try and grow everything as best I can. But even that, like I can't. You get to this point where, well, you could in theory put everything up to whatever it is, 20, 30 sets, but like in practice, I don't have the recoverability to be able to even do that. So I have to pick and choose my battles even there because of hitting that, I guess, max recoverable volume, you could call it, in that scenario. Something I wanted to come on to for you, Holly, was this discussion on cardio. You mentioned kind of just total expenditure. And I
Hmm.
believe from watching your vlogs, there was a good chunk of time where you weren't doing any cardio because you just didn't have the time. But then you were finding that you were basically, you mentioned your calories and you actually mentioned a calorie floor, which you wouldn't want to go below. And so it became kind of an inevitability. You're going to have
Hmm.
to do something to get energy expenditure up. So I'd love to hear kind of that process.
Yeah, so I think historically, every prep that I've ever done, like straight off the bat, there's always been like a noticeable uptick in like cardio to help with creating that deficit. Obviously, no one wants to just strip their carbohydrates and strip all their fats and have very little food flexibility. So, I've certainly always made adjustments to kind of both ends of the equation to, allow you to start making, to get results. And this year, just because of the like launch of one of our new companies and just significant like increased requirement for me to be involved in the day-to-day runnings of the company because it's brand new. We're still technically a startup. Historically, I was part of companies that we kind of built and they were just very stable. So I had a little bit more time to do this. So, yeah, it was the first time ever where I physically did not have any more hours in the day. So, after all of my coaching, and we're talking about like what's a normal client number, I have about 50 clients that I work with at any one time. So, I'd say it's about 45 hours of coaching. And then, it leaves me 2 other days basically for all of my admin work and then weekends. So, by the time I was finishing coaching, I was getting close to midnight, like on my coaching days. So I just don't have any time to go and do cardio. I think there are a few nights where I might get like 30 minutes of walking in on the treadmill at literally midnight. So for the first, I think maybe 10 weeks of this prep, I was only able to manipulate my nutrition and my average steps, I think were around 4 or 5,000 per day, believe it or not. I just sit here, I'm in front of my computer, working very much sedentary. So it was a funny experience. It was nerve-wracking because I wasn't sure whether I was going to be able to get to where I needed to, and I kinda chalk this up to a couple of things. First off, there's no way I would have been able to do that a decade ago. Like, think about our muscle mass back when we first started, like, we had none. So, in order to create a caloric deficit, you have to get very aggressive with your nutrition, and you don't necessarily have, like, this robust metabolism because of the muscle that you have. Like, muscle is your friend when it comes to helping with fat loss because it is the demanding, it's the thing that's driving your energy requirements. Like lean tissue really is what helps helps improve your BMR. So when I first started competing, I didn't have a lot of muscle mass. So I didn't really have a high requirement for calories. So it was always so difficult to create fat loss. And I had to do so much cardio to kind of get down into that lean, shredded physique. And I think, a decade has passed, and I would say at least 7 of those years I've spent, being very proactive and mindful in my off season to go into a build. And I have gotten to uncomfortable levels of body fat. I think 1 year after my competition, I put on 30 pounds, which is crazy to think about. But I did it, didn't enjoy it one bit, but I knew it was important for longevity of the sport. And also, it was something that I think was a good mental challenge too, getting past, the aesthetics. Like you can be happy and still be fine, even in a higher body fat percentage. So I think it's with just years of that resistance training and putting on muscle. I'd say I'm probably 10 kilos heavier than what I was when I first started this journey. That has afforded me the metabolic power to not have to do hours and hours of cardio. So just me sitting here at rest, doing nothing is driving a lot of energy expenditure just working. So I didn't have to go out and do crazy amounts of cardio. But I found that because I wasn't doing any of that, my ability to recover from the resistance training sessions, oh my gosh, it was so much better. I didn't have the soreness that I have had in previous preps where, it might only be, I don't know, 3 HIIT cardio sessions and some commitments to walking most days. Just that little bit of cardio was making it hard for me to recover from my training because I haven't really done anything different about my resistance training protocols other than muscle group specificity. So yeah, to not have to commit to all of that cardio and still get into condition, it was really good. I would say that I didn't have to navigate being in pain all the time and really sore and under recovered. So that was something that I will now probably take into the way that I coach because I can see the benefits. I felt the benefits of not having to do hours and hours of cardio. So it would probably encourage me with the clients that I work with to, you know, focus on the build a little bit more, get the muscle mass as quickly as you can so that it makes it easier in future rather than trying to do all the things all at once. So yeah.
That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I think when people, especially in the evidence-based space, when people say, "Oh, well, I don't know how much muscle, but a small amount of extra muscle, you only get X amount of additional kind of calorie expenditure." And yeah, when you look at it as maybe kind of a pound or 2 pounds, it's probably not that much. But when you look at when we started to where you are now, and like you said, you're kilos upon kilos upon kilos heavier, suddenly that has a significant influence on things. And it's very interesting to hear that you're feeling more recovered as well from being on it's in prep, it's like you rob Peter to pay Paul. Yeah, you could do more expenditure, but then that kind of you have to kind of pay off something else here, and so you're
Getting more
finding
hungry.
actually, yeah, exactly. So it's less food, but recovered better. So it seemed like a fair trade off for you.
Yeah, just the physiological benefits was great. Yeah, so just to touch on what you were saying, I think for every 1 kilogram of muscle that we put on, it would improve your basal metabolic rate. I believe, and again, based on research papers that have looked at this, it's about 22 to 25 calories per kg. So yeah, if we look at that in absolute terms, it doesn't seem like very much. So if you put on 4 kilograms, that's only 100 calories more to your BMR. So I think my measured BMR is 1,400. So if I put on 4 more kgs, that's only taking me up to what, 1,500? So it doesn't sound like a lot, but I think it's when you then go and move that more muscular body, the demand of energy for moving and going about activity, that you really start to reap those benefits. So yeah, I can say that that's certainly been a positive contribution to my most recent prep for sure.
And you mentioned a calorie kind of floor that you wouldn't go below. Can you kind of say what that is and kind of what your thoughts are behind that?
Yeah, so that's actually based on that data that I just mentioned to you. So, again, for every 1 kilogram of muscle that you have, there's a requirement for about 22 to 25 calories. So, it's in part due to energy requirements, but also you don't want to reduce your calories so low that you start to contribute to possible micronutrient deficiencies. So, the calorie floor is intended to keep you at a safe amount or an efficacious amount of calories, an efficacious amount of protein, without prevent or with the hopes of minimizing the likeliness of micronutrient deficiencies. So yeah, that's what that number is. And I would personally never want to go below that. I think my philosophies are certainly, despite this being an extreme sport, I still try to do things with balance. I mean, I flexibly diet. There are no foods that are off limits. I still go out most weekends and eat out, with my partner. It's part of a lifestyle. And I've always wanted to be able to do this in a balanced way if I'm going to do it. Sure, it gets difficult, at the end when you're on very low calories and you're feeling fatigued, but I don't want it to stop my life. I still want to be able to be social. I don't want to become a homebody. I already live in the four walls of my office every day, and it's nice to get out and, feel part of something bigger. So, yeah, I've always tried to look at it through that lens, and I think a lot of people think that I am crazy when they see me vlogging and still going out for meals and having, a cocktail or wine on the weekends, and I'm like 2 weeks out from show. But yeah, I don't think that I would want to do it if I couldn't also still live life the way that I like to. So it's been kind of fun to incorporate some balance where I can.
I think that's what's so well said. I think a lot of people look at bodybuilding through the lens of, I don't know, whoever their favorite fitness influencer is. And they're like, oh, I must do my bodybuilding journey like that person and mirror that. But it's really refreshing to hear your side of it, where it's like, actually, so I actually saw one of your vlogs. I think it was peak week. It may even be the day before the show. You went out to eat for breakfast maybe or something like that. And you were kind of estimating the food. And I was like, oh,
I
I
had a
would.
burger.
Yeah, you had a burger, and I was like, "Oh, I'm not sure I'd be comfortable doing that." But like you were, and you're incredibly dedicated. You want to be as competitive as possible. You're kind of crossing every T, dotting every I, and there'd be some people would be like frown upon that potentially. But for you, like you just said, if you weren't able to do that sort of thing, you might not be competing in the first place. So it's you have to find your own balance and way of doing things. And I guess at this point, you've become pretty expert at estimating foods out.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, my background's in dietetics, so we spend a lot of time thinking, talking, living, breathing, eating foods as a dietitian. So I think there's certainly some advantages there. I mean, I don't think that for people that don't have that background, if they were kind of just doing this as a hobby, which a lot of the folks that I work with, they're accountants. They've got backgrounds in like completely different areas of interest. So they don't have that food knowledge. So I think that it's certainly a little bit more novel, but it's also something that can be learned. Like everyone's got to eat. So if you practice, flexible dieting and tracking macros enough, and I mean, I did that for goodness, it would be coming up to 2 decades of like reading and tracking food. You start to learn a lot. And I think there's a lot to be said in practicing cooking at home. Sure, some people don't want to do that. I get it. Like I'll never push that on any client to become an expert chef, but I think it's made my life a lot easier by knowing how to cook because, I've made all of my favorite foods from every cuisine. Like I've experimented with it at home. So I have a much better idea, I think, about how to make things. So I feel more confident in that restaurant scenario where I'm ordering egg souffle, bacon burger for breakfast the day before because I know how to make souffle. Yeah, it's certainly been helpful, but it does require a lot more. I mean, you flexible diet too, Steve. So yeah, I think tracking is time consuming. And that is such a stark difference to the approach that I have when I'm not competing. Like I don't track macros anymore. And I think if it weren't for, the period of time when I was going through my separation where I did not physically have any more time in the day to track macros, I don't know that I ever would have been, I don't know that I voluntarily would have stopped, just being very honest about it. I don't know that there would have been a scenario I can envision where I would have been confident or comfortable enough to step away from tracking because that's all I'd ever done. But it was really comforting and grounding to know that you can still maintain a really healthy physique without tracking anything. There's obviously, I'd say being at maintenance is not passive. I think a lot of people have this idea that, once they find their maintenance calories, it's just a passive thing. I don't have to have, there's no thought or a requirement that needs to go in it. That's not true. I think there's still always going to be some amount of intention that goes into it, but you can still maintain a great amount of muscle mass just by estimating, did I have 4 or 5 servings of protein today? Did I eat enough to feel satisfied and to perform very well, when I trained? Like you can do it mindfully and still do great. I mean, I'm living proof of doing that. And I'm sure there's many others that do it as well.
Yeah, I think it's similar, very similar to me, where I like year round track. I don't know. I don't go through mindful eating off seasons like you have.
Interesting.
Not yet, at least. But it is one of those things where I've never been forced into that corner, apart from sometimes I am. So we're speaking off air, and the listeners might know I went to the Maldives, thankfully, and I was just like, that was a great opportunity for me to like, man, it's an all inclusive resort. Like I am not taking scales, I'm not monitoring stuff like I normally would, but I'll just be mindful. So I do like pull on, I do flex and use it like that. But I like the kind of like you probably where you were, until you were forced to have to stop it, you liked the kind of rigidity or the rigidity that also gives flexibility in some ways and that precision and
Yeah.
knowing you're moving towards something. But then when you've had extended time of not, it's opened you up to kind of further opportunities, which is really great.
Yeah, and I would honestly encourage anybody if they are and have tracked for a really long period of time, um, take that information and just recognize that you know a lot. If you've been tracking for more than 5 years, you would be surprised at how much you do know. And I think sometimes it's almost like you've got to take a leap of faith and trust that you do have the skill set to eat mindfully and Uh, make decisions that align with your goals without that level of precision. But I think it's such a valuable skill to have, developed over the years. But it's certainly not something that I think everybody needs to do indefinitely. You don't need to if you've got, a good foundation of knowledge around food. So, yeah, I don't know that I would be able to continue bodybuilding and also having a career, a pretty busy one at that, if I was to track macros year round, or at least something else would be sacrificed. I think I tracked 1 year, in 1 week. It was 3 hours I was spending on my phone entering in foods. I was like, that's 3 hours of my life every week. How many hours is that over the course of the year? It was crazy. And I thought about all the other things that I could be doing with 3 hours, like, or just being more present with, the people that I care about. It does take away from that. Even if you want to go and eat out as a flexible dieter, there's a component of the time where you've got your head in your phone, and I think you kind of life passes by. So I was kind of getting to the point where I was like, yeah, I know I could keep doing this, but it's also been really positive to see that I can trust my own intuition and my own internal cues and knowledge and decisions, and maintain a good healthy body, like a healthy physique.
Yeah, I think I can definitely see those benefits, especially for someone like yourself with how busy you are and you have got quite, when we talk about flexible dieting, your diet sounds like it is probably not in prep, but outside of that off season, it varies quite a bit. You like to cook from home and make different things. I am, if you looked at I don't know, I haven't looked at my MyFitnessPal time, but I imagine it's less than an hour only because I pretty much eat the same things. I just copy and paste it to the next day. And it's just like
Yeah.
I vary between like salmon and eggs one day, and then but I will eat out and things like this. But it's like it doesn't take me much time. But I can definitely see if I went down the route of, I don't know, if I had kids and then I suddenly have those 3 hours, I need those for the kid. Well, come on, like there's a lot more to go towards other things. So I can definitely see that. Holly, before we wrap up, I know you mentioned that you get a lot of questions on supplements, and you also mentioned micronutrient deficiencies, which again, I think a good reason to have a floor of calories too. And I think a lot of people unfortunately get into deficiencies during their preps, especially that more extremist, probably not people listening to this podcast, hopefully, but that more extreme, less flexible dieting approach where they maybe even cut out things like milk and they have zero calcium in their diet, things like this, you know what I mean? So I'd love to hear what supplements you tend to take during a contest prep or when you're off season, and maybe any you recommend and just your general philosophy surrounding supplements.
Yeah, I'll jump in with just what I currently take. It's actually a very short list. I have a multivitamin and I have an omega-3. That's literally all I use. I think a lot of the research in like supplementation and performance and muscle building, it's probably been overhyped. And I think some of the earlier works that we look at, especially when it comes to muscle growth, again, they're using indirect measures of muscle growth. A lot of the studies on creatine, for instance, rely very heavily upon data from DEXA. And we've recently just seen a study. It was a 13-week intervention in untrained individuals where they had a wash-in period. So basically, the creatine group were given creatine for a week. The control group weren't given anything. And within that 1 week time frame, there was like a 1 kilogram increase in fat-free mass or lean tissue. Without any without any resistance training intervention even included yet. And then when we got to the very end of the study, there were no statistical differences in, the lean tissue between the two groups. So I really think that the research in creatine on muscle growth specifically has been overhyped, largely due to the way in which it's often measured. Um, and then, yeah, I think when it comes to like other fat burners and things like that, even though data might be reported as being statistically significant, so there's some kind of a benefit between the control group and not, the effect size is underwhelming. Or if we look at like how much it was able to improve somebody's energy expenditure, let's say some of these thermogenic aids, when you look at what those differences are and then relate it to what somebody's daily energy requirements are, it kind of becomes insignificant, or it might only afford somebody the ability to lose, I don't know, half of a pound, and then that's it. That's where the benefit stops. So I'm just not really, there's nothing that I've seen that is like overwhelmingly like positive. And for the expense of some of these supplements, I just think that it's not really worth it. So I don't really push supplements on people, I think, unless, if you've got a good diet, if you're eating a balanced diet, you're paying attention to all the food groups. I don't feel like there's a whole lot of need for lots of extra things. There are going to be some cases where, people eat very specific ways and they might not enjoy eating, red meat, and thus their iron intake is really low, or they might not be the biggest fan of seafood. Yes, take an omega-3 supplement. But I think when it comes to performance, or at least muscle growth, let's be specific about that. There's nothing that I think, short of someone taking performance enhancing drugs, that can really make meaningful differences. I would recommend creatine, though, for strength and for power and performance. I think that can certainly be beneficial. But I wouldn't be taking it under the guise of it's helping with muscle building. So yeah, that's kind of my philosophy around supplements. And then in terms of preventing deficiencies, um, look, I think that the areas that I pay most attention to are dietary fats. So, a lot of people ask about the different dietary approaches when cutting, is one better than the other? The one that I'm probably least fan of would be very low fat intakes, especially for females. So, essential fatty acids, there's a requirement for the brain. There's a requirement for hormonal balance. There's a requirement for preventing gallstones. I had somebody recently that started the GLP-1. I didn't know, was not aware. And this is before she was not working. This is somebody that was not working with me, just an acquaintance. And she was rushed to the emergency room in the hospital. And she said to me, Holly, I've got to have my gallbladder removed. And I was like, what's going on? And she was telling me about her diet. And because she didn't know any better, she thought just fasting and not eating, fats would be helpful in facilitating fat loss. But she'd undereaten essential fatty acids by such a degree that she ended up developing a gallstone and had to have her gallstones removed. So, I mean, there are all these different clinical presentations that do require a certain amount of fat, as part of your daily intake. And then, again, speaking in the realm of fats, if we don't have enough dietary fat, it prevents the bioavailability of certain fat-soluble vitamins, so A, D, E, and K. You're not going to get those from your diet if you're not having a sufficient amount of fat. So, yeah, I think there are a lot of problems that can arise hormonally and just nutritionally from a health perspective if you underconsume essential fatty acids. And then, thinking about food diversity, one of the issues that I have with like structured meal plans is that it doesn't necessarily afford you the ability to get everything in. So if you start taking out, certain food groups, I heard somebody say to me just recently that their friends were recommended to consume only carbohydrates from fruits and non-starchy vegetables. Whilst I can get behind those food groups, I think they're great. But what they're now limiting is all of the B vitamins by not having any breads, grains, and cereals, so niacin, riboflavin, thiamine. I mean, now all of those are potentially going to become deficient if you're taking out that food group, which can, influence your metabolism. Like B vitamins are important for metabolism. So, yeah, I think it's important to have variety. And I don't think people need to strive for perfection every day. But, I look at my diet over a month lens. And I try to make sure that, hey, did I have all of the colored vegetables? Did I get purple? Because purple has anthocyanins. Did I have red? Did I get lycopene? I want color and variety to make sure that I've got, a good balance of all of those things. Um, and I believe, with the research coming through now in the gut microbiome, you want to make sure that you've got good variety for good gut health too. Otherwise, people start to end up with dysbiosis. They've got constipation and GI and bloating issues because their food groups are so lacking. So, yeah, that's that.
Yeah, or especially in a contest prep scenario with like obviously getting the relative energy deficiency kind of symptoms, and one of those being kind of poorer digestion and like
Yeah.
people, it's easy. I know even in my prep, and I like to have a diverse number of plants and like variety in my diet, and still my digestion some days was just like not playing ball. And so, like you said, these again, bodybuilders typical for it, meal plans, very little variety, and quite often cutting out full food groups. They put themselves in a real kind of precarious
Yeah.
position.
And I don't judge them either though, because it's easy. Like it just
Yeah.
simplifies the process. Like it's taking out one variable that is kind of annoying, which is tracking macros. So I get it. But it doesn't mean that it has no negative consequences either. I think you've just got to weigh up the pros and the cons. So yeah.
And I do very similar to you, actually, like an omega-3. If you're not getting your fatty fish, then a multivitamin's a great shout, especially a well-dosed one. Particularly, I like to look at zinc, magnesium
Mhm.
as two minerals that a lot of kind of hard trainees tend to have a bit of a lack in. And then vitamin D is one. I suppose you don't have to
Yeah.
worry about vitamin D because you're probably getting good sun exposure there in Florida.
Yeah. I love it.
But
Yeah.
then
So
creatine for most as well. The cognitive benefits, which I'm sure you've seen kind of coming out more
yes,
data, is
yeah, that's
impressive.
it's been interesting to kind of see where creatine's showing up in like other health outcomes, but I guess I'll continue to watch that space. It's been an interesting evolution of creatine's effectiveness. So
Yeah.
yeah,
And it's sad that I saw that. I think it was, I don't know if it was a meta analysis, but like you said, that study where basically questioning the effectiveness of creatine for muscle growth. And I was like, oh man, the one supplement that Natty's had is there like, this is the one that's going to help with muscle growth. It's like, nope, we're going to take
no,
that one away from you potentially as well.
yeah, I actually saw. I think it's Cando. I think
Oh
that's
yeah,
his
Dr.
surname.
Candout,
Yes,
yes.
yes, yes. You may have even had him on your podcast. So I mean, he's been somebody that I've followed in his research for a long time. And I recently saw him on a podcast and a new paper that came out where he was finally in support of this. Okay, yeah, creatine's probably been overstated for muscle growth for these reasons. And I was like, oh, that's good. This is great. So I mean, it's not a bad thing. I think it's just great to be informed and to know why you're taking something. And I mean, it's not a bad supplement. I think it's got lots of other redeeming qualities. It's just not the one that us natty athletes were hoping that it was having the effect on. But it is what it is.
Yeah, I haven't had him on the podcast yet. He's a very busy man. I have actually reached out to him, but we're going to get him on at some point. So
Oh,
he
that'd be
will come
cool.
on and we'll have a chat. But finally, I guess, Holly, in regards to the rest of your season, then you mentioned kind of the end goal being kind of getting to the Olympia. What can people expect to see of you over the next weeks? This will probably come out. This will actually probably come out in a month, unfortunately. So it'll be a bit behind. So just bear that in mind. But so you may have already, and you probably will have already done a few shows by then.
So next competition will be the first weekend of August. So I don't know where that will fall in line
That's a
of this
while.
being released, but that's the Tampa Pro. So that's a huge show. It's like if anyone's in the Tampa area, I mean the men's open is here. I mean it pulls a really good crowd. So all of the influencers usually make it down, all the well-known bodybuilders. So it's fun. And then, yeah, I will be doing mostly just shows close to where I live. So to eliminate some of that travel and just time away from work, lots of Florida based shows. So there's some in Sarasota, there's one in Davie, there's one just north of me up in Atlanta. I think there's a Texas show that I'm going to do as well with one of the judges who I was chatting with. She said, come and do my show. So there's a few, they'll be back to back. But yeah, I certainly hope I qualify. I mean, to get a win as an IFBB Pro Bikini, it's such a competitive landscape now, and like the quality of the athletes is just incredible. So, I mean, I'm grateful that I placed fourth last weekend at my show as my second time on stage as a pro. So, yeah, I think it'll be fun to manipulate my nutrition. I've got a bit of a game plan, which I talk about in my upcoming YouTube video. So, it'll be fun to implement something that I've never done before. I will be, yeah, seeing what I can do dietary wise to bring in a better looking physique, but there's only so much growing a natural person can do in 8 weeks. So, I'll have my ultrasound out ready and I will report back and see what's actually, realistic when, and I'll be pushing the boundaries for upper limits of volume because, I mean, right now there's nothing in the research that I can look to really help guide my training because, there's probably less than a dozen studies that look at high volume. I think in our recent volume review, we pulled all of the data, like every single study and the different comparisons of volume. And there's probably 6 that are above 30. So there's not many studies that look at more than 30 sets per week per muscle group. And I'd say that there are currently more studies that don't support volume being necessary or high volume training for muscle growth, where there are basically no statistical differences between the highest group and then the moderate group. There's a couple that do, but the study design is so different to how we would actually implement like our training. The frequency is usually a little bit lower. Most of the research is either 2 or 3 sessions a week. And I think that's just a factor of like the researchers not wanting to do a 5-day training protocol because then they have to be in the lab 5 days a week, measuring every single participant. So yeah, there's limitations with those volumes not being spread out how I would, do it in my program, which would be 4 or 5 days of training, which potentially might yield better results because you've got, I guess, more opportunity to signal growth rather than packing it all into, 1 or 2 or 3 sessions a week where there's lots of diminishing returns. At least that's my belief. So yeah, kind of flying blind at the moment, but it'll be fun to see how it goes.
That will be interesting. Yeah, I think a lot of the research, like you have to just draw principles from it and kind of get some sort of idea of where you might then lean with your training. But especially for someone like you, Holly, I mean, a lot of the research, first of all, is done on males, I guess. And then especially the training age of what you have and specifically your goals becomes more and more about your own personal kind of scientific experiment and learning from that than necessarily leaning too heavily on these studies sometimes.
Yeah, and I think, I mean, there's probably even subtle differences between like resistance trained individuals. I mean, the criteria differ in research, but yeah, I think maybe for someone that's been training for 2 to 5 years, they're still considered resistance trained. But, for someone that's been training for 10 to 15 years, do we still see the same like growth adaptations to high volume studies if we were to compare those two individuals? Like, you don't know, because I think the closer we get to our genetic ceiling, I have to imagine that there's a lot of biological breaks that are kind of trying to slow you down. And I would say I'm probably in that category where I don't know whether there's a whole lot more that I can do, in certain muscle groups at least. I think if I were to pick back up and do buys and try training, I'd probably be back to being a beginner again, really. But for certain muscle groups, I don't know whether higher volumes are necessarily going to be effective. So, yeah, you're kind of just trialing your way through and hope for the best.
Yes, absolutely. I'll make sure to link your YouTube because we've mentioned that a few times with your vlog, your Instagram, your website. Is there anything else I should put into the description so people can kind of keep an eye on everything that you're doing?
As far as like education and content, no, those are it. But we do have a training app, which is called Be a Fit, which has got hundreds of like evidence-based programs for different interests and experience levels. So that was something that we launched a little earlier this year. So that's been going really well. But yeah, as far as free information, you got it.
Fantastic. I'll make sure BFit's linked in there as well so people can check that out because that sounds very interesting. I'm sure many of the listeners will be interested. And thank you so much for your time, Holly. All the best with your goal of getting to the Olympia. I'll be watching with interest. I'm sure a lot of the audience will be. And we'll talk to you soon. Cheers, guys.